Donald, and I am the Executive Director of the Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance. And on behalf of Jeannie Diefendiefer, our CEO, and our whole team, welcome to today's discussion about how honest strategic conversations drive agility, trust, and performance. The Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance is a CEO-led community building of CEOs building thriving companies that are ready to solve the world's problems. We understand how the collective focus, you understand how the collective focus on people, purpose, and performance really create successful, thriving organizations. We bring leaders together, like today, to learn from one another with experiences of peers and experts who challenge and advance thinking and practice. Everything that we do is grounded in academic research and in real-world experience, and today's call is structured to bring those things really to you as leaders. I am thrilled to be joined today by three incredible leaders who have spent decades working on the practices that we will explore today. First, Ed Ludwig is the retired CEO and chairman of Becton Dickinson, a leading global medical device company, where he spent a successful 30 years. Ed is also the lead director for Boston Scientific and on the board of CVS Health, a number of early stage companies, as well as a trustee for many large nonprofits. We are incredibly lucky that Ed serves on the board of the Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance and is one of our founding member CEOs. Lynn Wedall has had a long and successful career as a strategic human resource leader. She was the group HR director, that's CHRO in American speak, of a leading UK-based companies, including Selfridges, Dixon's Carphone Warehouse, Bupa, and Whitbread. Lynn now serves on a number of board and advisory roles, including as the Senior Independent Director of Doc Martens, Greggs, and Treat, among other organizations. She's also a trustee of the Prince's Trust. And last, but certainly not least, I'm really excited to be here today with my friend and luminary colleague, Mike Beer. Mike is the Connors Robb Professor Emeritus of the Harvard Business School. Mike has spent decades researching what it truly means to create human-centric, high-performing organizations that deliver great performance for all of their stakeholders. He has really, fueled the creation of this community. He was an author of Higher Ambition, the book that was the foundation of the CEO community that came together here. And most recently of Fit to Compete, why honest conversations about your company's capabilities are the key to a winning strategy. If you haven't gotten it, we're happy to share a copy with you. Mike is also the founding partner of TruePoint, a mission-driven consulting firm, and the founding board member of this Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance. And before we dive in, and I'm going to turn to these great folks to really be the centerpiece of the conversation, I want to encourage those of you on the call to share your thoughts, share your questions, share your experiences. Many of you have firsthand experience with the practices that we're talking about today in the chat, or to raise your hand with a question or comment. And so now I'm going to turn to the leaders who have been there to really bring this to life for us. First, I'm going to ask for Ed to share, your experiences in how honest strategic conversations played a role in your own leadership career and what the value has been. Bring it to life for us, Ed.
Thank you, Kathy, and good day, everyone, wherever you are. So I am proud to say that I was the phase 1 clinical trial for the strategic fitness process that Mike developed. I was among the first users at Becton Dickinson. I had just been named to be a division leader for the first time in my life. I was 38 years old in 1989. I'd never run a business before. I'm an accountant and a CPA by training. And I was sent down to run this business in Maryland, a highly technical diagnostics business for infectious diseases. And I had heard about Mike through our management process. And I asked my boss, I said, I think I need this. So Mike came down. I was one of his first beneficiaries. Basically so I'm going to repeat these themes over and over again. I hope I leave you with them. Accelerate and engage. So the process of that Mike is going to describe in a bit, the process of getting your team together, defining where you're going, engaging your organization and where we're going, and then asking honest questions about how do we go better and faster? What should we be doing more of and less of I discovered some very, very interesting and exciting HR issues that were in the division that I never would have found out, or I would have found out a lot later. Let's put it that way. So it helped me accelerate and engage my organization as a brand new leader. I then used it as a brand new CEO in 2000. I created a process with my team. The task force went out and asked a bunch of questions. And a major insight of this particular one was that an SAP, major SAP conversion that we were about to start going live with was badly off the tracks. And I had started the process in 1998 as the CFO. Here I am in my first months, weeks as CEO, and the team came back. And this is the other power here, is speaking truth to power. This was not a message I wanted to hear, that an SAP process that I had started was badly off track. We ended up, by the way, getting it back on track as a result of this, quickly back on track, got right people involved. It did cost us more and it cost a little more time and money. But at the end of it, we were actually given awards for how well we ended up doing this. And I was able to go back to my board and say, look, we've got a problem here. We've got to solve it. My board supported me. The last time I used it was when I was transitioning out of my CEO role, and my successor, Vince Forlenza, and I started a strategic fitness process in 2010-11 together. We focused particularly on innovation. BD had gone through strategic fitness processes of general types. In this particular process, we engaged customers. Also, we got feedback from customers and from competitors, other people in the medical technology industry, not necessarily direct competitors, but other med tech companies, and got their input. What did they think about BD, and how could BD become a more innovative company? And by halfway through the process, I sort of sailed off into the sunset, and Vince took over as CEO. He finished the process, implemented many of the suggestions that the process developed, and it was a great first step for him to become the CEO of Becton Dickinson. So those are the big three. And I really look forward to further questions. And so bear in mind, again, this is a process that I think could be universally applied, whether you're new to the job, whether you're going through changes. Accelerate, engage, and really helps do that. And speaking truth to power, which we all need. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. That's some great context and great use cases specifically of how these principles have been used. Lynn, can you tell us a little bit about your own experiences across various organizations?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Lovely to meet you. I was just thinking, I actually first came across this when I met Mike. It was nearly 20 years ago, and I was one of the task force. Yeah, you're laughing away there, Mike. Obviously, I was 18 at the time. Used it in a number of different contexts, but I thought the one that I would share with you was when I was at Bupa. I joined them, and Bupa, the international healthcare company, and they were in the midst of this big change program, particularly their hospitals division, where they were trying to move from being what was a very physician doctor-centric approach to how they ran the business to being much more sort of patient-led. And they've been working on this for over a year, and everyone thought it was a marvelous idea. They had the conference, they got all the Gantt charts and the process plans, and the project teams and the consultants were in, but the needle just wasn't moving at all, and they were just trying to figure out why nothing was actually changing. And so we used this strategic, honest conversations process to sort of really get under the skin of it. And I think, as Ed said, that ability to speak truth to power, it became abundantly clear. It was the way of being able to say the emperor's got no clothes on. That although there was this incredible change program that everyone, on paper, it made loads of sense, but in reality, it was a million miles from what was actually happening in hospitals. At the end of the day, the physicians, the doctors had the power. in that system. They were godlike almost. And frankly, there was a complete disconnect between the work that was being generated at head office and what was actually going on in hospitals. So as a result of that feedback, and it was pretty brutal, candidly, and quite hard to hear at the time, we took a completely different approach to how we designed the whole change program. It moved from head office to the hospital. It became clinician-led. So the doctors started to kind of take a much more leading role within it all, and people at the sharp end, the nurses and so on, and started to redesign processes that really kind of worked from the patient perspective. And then that created a kind of hospital hothouse where they were able to iterate and learn new ideas and roll those out, and they led on that change program. It was really a powerful way of unlocking some of those friction points. And as I say, it's sort of the thing that everyone knew, but nobody could ever say that this change program was just not happening. As a result of that, they doubled their profitability, they increased their NPS scores and their engagement scores, even to the extent that they won business that they'd never won before. And actually, as a result of that, the Bupa group decided to sell that part of the business because actually it could create so much value alone. And now it's a very successful listed company in its own right. So look, that's one example. There are many others, and I think I would echo all that Ed said around that acceleration, the ability to engage, speak truth to power. But I think this point as well around that, the ability to kind of really get under the skin of what are the root causes that are going on, and look at and address the whole system and not just the kind of symptoms that you're normally tackling and addressing. Kathy, I'll pause.
Yeah, and I'll just build on what you're saying there, or ask a follow-up question, Lynn, before we're going to turn shortly to all of you on the call to ask you some questions about things that you're experiencing in your own organization, and then Mike to give us a little bit of a deeper dive into how this really works. But Lynn, you've had a long career as a human resource leader, and there's a lot of different ways to tap into what's going on in your organization, from surveys to really great leaders that are regularly meeting with people and understanding. What makes this different in an approach, and why would you use it?
I think what makes it different, well, I think there are a number of factors. One is that it's a way of creating emotion. And I love that phrase. If you think about emotion, actually creates motion. That it's a way of actually really kind of getting some energy and getting the real voices in the organization in the room. I think it also is a way of looking at the whole system. So normally we look at things in isolation, we tackle parts of it, whether it's through a kind of survey or a deep dive in one area, and you rarely get beyond the kind of tactical answers. If you think about when you run an employee survey, normally as a result of it, there's a whole host of tactical solutions that are put in place, and then you still get the same results year in, year out. This is a way of really, I think, understanding the whole system, getting to the root causes and looking for those patterns and finding ways of really changing those patterns and creating some kind of emotion and movement in the system.
That's a great point. Ed, anything you'd add to Lynn's take about what makes this kind of an approach distinctive?
No, I would reinforce. She hit a very important point as a trained Duran facilitator in Six Sigma at Greenbelt. You can't go from symptom to remedy. You have to go from symptom to root cause, and that is very important. I think we've all seen in organizations some symptoms of things that aren't going particularly well, but digging down below that, getting to the root cause, I think is really important, because then that you begin the solution process. Once you understand the root cause, then you can go. Same thing with medicine or anything else. You have to understand you have to do first a good diagnostic. The second thing is that these task forces, Lynn was just saying she was on a task. I was on a task force too, by the way. After I did my business one, the CEO, Becton Dickinson, ran a process, Ray Gilmartin, and I was on his task force for the whole company. So I've been on both sides of this. The other thing is that the task force, once it delivers its message to the leadership team then debates what they want to do about this. They ultimately come up with some programs and projects and processes. And then they go back to the task force and say, here's what we heard, and here's what we're going to do about it. And oh, by the way, would any of you want to be on any of these solution teams? And inevitably, everyone on the task force says, yeah, I heard the problem. You've heard the problem. Now I want to join you in solving it. So I think those are the other elements of the process.
Mobilizing folks to go after.
Absolutely.
Really happening.
Absolutely.
That's great. Very important in today's world. I'm going to turn to Mike in just a moment to give us more of the, concretely bring to life for all of you on the call who have not used these principles and processes, really what we're talking about here as it relates to how you go about doing, creating honest, collective strategic conversations in your organization. But first, I'm going to ask my colleague Gail to field a little bit of a survey here on the Zoom call. And over many, many years of the research that Mike and Russ Eisenstadt and others have done, it has really demonstrated that there is a systemic set of challenges that exist within organizations that can be surfaced and addressed through these kind of approaches. And here's a quick poll for all of you, I think. Gail, are we ready with that? About those. And so I wanted to ask you what you see resident within your own organizations. Gail, are you ready with the poll? Nope. Have I lost her? There we go. All right, so I think you can check as many as apply, but these are a set of challenges known as the silent killers of strategy implementation, of effective execution, of change having the impacts that you want it to have. And there are 6 things that are listed here, and you can choose, which of them, could be all of them, could be some of them, could be one of them, that are really prevalent within your own organization, that are things that you think might be getting in the way of getting the kind of outcomes and impact that you would like to be having as a leadership team. All right. And then Mike, I'm going to ask for your reactions to that poll and then turn it over to you to tell us more about how this kind of approach helps to get under the covers of what's happening. All right, do we have some results, Gail? There we go. All right, so nearly 70% of folks are saying unclear strategy and conflicting priorities, which in a fast-moving world like we're living in today, it's probably not surprising that that's the leading response. The second is poor coordination or conflict across businesses and functions, the different units of an organization. And then a close third is a low capacity for honest collective conversations that help to surface those very things. And then the next 3, ineffective senior team leadership is either too hands off, or too top down, and inadequate leadership development are also there as significant challenges. So Mike, are you surprised in what you're seeing there?
No, I'm not. The coordination and lack of clarity of direction and inability to speak truth to power are the key elements. Although in our research, we found lower level senior teams as ineffective, and usually the leader is part of that problem. Lack of engagement of the senior leader, lack of ability to confront conflict and get the senior team working right and the organization working right. So we keep in mind that the people who are answering the survey are the leaders of these organizations. So they may not see it exactly accurately either. But those are the 3 ones you showed are definitely issues, and the lack of ability to speak truth to power is one of the reasons the methodology we created, the strategic fitness process, is a powerful methodology, because that conversation does not occur. So there's very little I can add to what Ed and Lynn already said about the process. Let me just reiterate a couple of key points that both made.
You, Mike, if you could just, also thinking that there's a various spectrum of folks on the call, if you might even take a step back and say sort of what are those core principles or elements of the process for folks in bringing the basics to life? Great.
So number one is the question of acceleration, the issue of acceleration, which Ed and Lynn both mentioned. And of course, that comes because the process forces, quote unquote, because it has to be agreed to by the senior team, the leader and the senior team, it forces a confrontation of the issues that often we do not want to confront. If you just think about ourselves as individuals in our relationship, if we have a problematic relationship, it's difficult to confront it because we want to protect the other person, and or we kind of fear what the person's response will be. It's a human condition to want to avoid conflict, and because it's uncomfortable, and we might learn some things about ourselves, we might hurt the other party, and all those reasons, we found that we had to create a methodology that enabled the leader and the senior team, as Ed and Lynn pointed out, to really have that essential conversation. So this is primarily about creating the conversation. It's a collective conversation that is everyone in the organization, either through the task force and their relationship with others, is to some extent involved. Some, about 100, usually very directly involved by contributing to the conversation. Others know about it, so that's critical. And it creates a togetherness, a common purpose in the organization around the change that normally does not happen in top-down change. And that was illustrated by both Lynn and Ed.
Mike, could I?
Yeah.
If I was sitting here listening and I had never been through the process, I don't know how it works. There may be people on the line who have never done this before.
Right.
Could you do a very, very simple, this is the first step.
Yes.
The top team says, I want to do this.
Yeah.
They write down their strategy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I think that might be helpful. Thank you.
Sure. And thank you, Ed. So let me first of all tell you the key steps. One, it has to start with the leader wanting to have the conversation. If the leader does not want to have the conversation, it will not work, or it will work only modestly. So the leader must want it and must then have a conversation with the senior team, and the senior team has to sign on. That's the first part of the conversation. Do we want to do this, and what do we hope to get out of it? Secondly, the leadership team has to spend time. Usually it depends on where they are and what they've already done, agreeing on the statement of direction. The statement of direction is a statement about our strategy, our purpose, our goals, and what it is we're trying to achieve as an organization. As Ed said, the last one he did was about innovation. Becton Dickinson wanted to become more innovative. So what the heck are the barriers doing it? That was the question. They already knew how to ask the question, how to go through the process, but this helped them do it. The second thing that has to happen is the senior team has to find a means for basically hearing from the organization. We have found a way to do that, but you can. We've had leaders who do it directly themselves, but we found that a task force of 8 or so people appointed by the senior team, so that anybody on the senior team can object. They have one veto for anyone that's mentioned. Every leader comes in with a nomination of 2 people and their activity, function, business, whatever it might be. And then a choice is made, and a task force of 8 to 10 there's been different numbers, but we think about 8 to 10 as the right number. And that task force then is invested, the senior team invests in them. What is this direction? So Ed directly met with the task force on his, both at the division and corporate level, to tell them what the direction was. And then they went out with that direction and interviewed 100 people. Each task force member only has to do about 10 or 12. It's not a primary, it's a second order job. You do this in addition to your primary task, and it's doable, we found, and can proceed relatively quickly. And then the task force is first trained for a day to go into doing these interviews. They interview each other, both about the substance and to look at the process and understand it better. And it's a confidential interview. So the people talking to the task force know that their name will not be linked to what they're saying, but the substance will be aired directly in an eyeball-to-eyeball conversation. That's very important. The eyeball-to-eyeball conversation between the task force and the senior team is different than a survey. And a lot of people know, oh, they're going to hear all this. Okay, that is somehow my words are going to be paraphrased or used without identifying me and so forth. Then the task force goes out and does the interviews and basically comes back to spend a day or so, usually a day, going through they've developed the key themes in each of their interviews and across their interviews, and then there's a sharing of that and a development of a set of common themes in that day. Then the next day, hopefully this should happen, the day before the actual feedback occurs. They develop those themes and they agree on who's going to lead the conversation. The task force is sitting in what we call a fishbowl, around a table with the senior team sitting in the outer U. That structure has turned out to be a very effective way for the task force to feel empowered and free to talk about what they found. It's not one person, it's the group. And we emphasize that with them because there's anxiety in the task force. There's no question about that. But they now know that they are not going to be singly telling senior management, and it's not them. They're reporting. They're not talking for themselves. Their input is already integrated into the results through the interviews they conducted with each other. And then the senior team listens, and their ground rules. We found those ground rules were essential. As Ed knows, at Becton Dickinson, we did a couple with leaders who, one of the leaders said, well, that's not true. What do you think happened to the conversation? We had to really work hard to resurrect the conversation. So, if perceptions of fact, you deal with the facts and you go to work in discussing them, understanding them, and solving the problem. And that's where the silent barriers usually come up in one way or another. Each organization expresses it in different ways, but those factors are real and fundamental, and this allows you to confront them. Most change efforts do not fail because somebody doesn't have the knowledge. There's something that Jeff Pfeffer, my colleague at Stanford, called the knowing performance gap. Knowing is not performing. And you need to understand emotionally, as Lynn, I think, said this, and understand and be ready to go ahead and make the changes. And that upward conversation by the task force to the senior team does it. The senior team then goes to work without the task force. The task force leaves and goes through a diagnosis. Okay, what are the underlying problems we're hearing? How do we begin to deal with them? And it goes beyond the silent killers. There may be other specific issues, structural issues, usually. Very important, okay? there is a picture of that process. That, by the way, you may think, oh, this is going to take a year. No, this can be done in 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the size of the organization, to get to the point where the senior team is hearing the results and they go to work on creating an action plan. I want to emphasize the senior team should do the diagnosis and create the action plan, because that's the strength of the process in a way. They are understanding exactly what they're trying to do and why, and they become committed to it. That's a key part. The top team matters here. And then we go ahead and, as Ed said, they create an action plan. They have to go back to the task force, critique this action plan. That act in itself changes fundamentally the relationship between the senior team and the task force, and by extension, the organization, as it begins to hear the real truth about what's going on. So that then makes, we've seen some changes, really major changes in some cases, that occur as a result of, oh, well, you didn't quite hear this right. In one organization, the senior team needed to take out a level and they hadn't done it in the action plan. The task force said, no, you hear us completely. You've got to go. So it's not usually everything, but it's some elements of the action plan. And then as Ed said correctly, the task force members become, they become centurions. They become the people who are willing to basically become part of the change effort, leading task forces or whatever it might be. And others do too, but that becomes an important part. You've got 8 to 10 people who are with you completely because they were part of the whole creation and so on. So that is the fundamental power of the process. You don't get that with top-down change. You don't get that with surveys. In one organization I worked with, the senior team just went to corporate and said, we don't need to do the survey. We're very happy with the way we can do this every year. And that's an important part. The organization can recycle this process and it becomes a process of continuous improvement.
So Mike,
think about Deming's work in quality. The point
so
was
can we
go
talk,
to people.
Let me dive in, Mike, and just follow up on that, right?
Sure.
You've had lots of experience with this over decades. The world is really different than it was when you and Ed were the beta of this, developing these processes and approaches. The timelines of change and the ability to develop the long-term strategic plan and then go off and execute it and pause and check in on how things are playing out is very different than today's VUCA world, as we talk about, right? Where the cycles of change are so great and the level of uncertainty and things coming at leaders has just gotten so much greater. What are your thoughts on how, why might this be relevant today, and what's it take to do it in this kind of a context?
The reason it's even more relevant today is exactly the reasons you said. Organizations need to be resilient. They need to function and respond to multiple sets of problems. Think about the pandemic, AI, changing markets, changing strategies, which is where this all started. So they need to have an organization that's capable of responding quickly. Confrontation becomes even more important because confrontation brings the issues into the fore. And they're always some of the same issues because they're core human issues, they're leadership issues, fundamental organizational issues. And they need constant readaptation and adjustment and improvement and think of these as capabilities. Each organization needs these capabilities to be responsive. You need a senior team who can connect to lower levels, find out what the issues are, act on them, reorganize as necessarily, create change. This is required today as it was yesterday.
That's great. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
yeah.
Let me turn back to Ed and to Lynn to get your take, and then I'm going to actually maybe even call on some folks that are sharing their experiences in the chat. But what's your take, about you're out there in the world today, you are directors on various organizations. How does it apply here in 2022 going into 2023?
I'll let Lynn go first.
Well, funnily enough, I was just thinking about this because I've used it recently or recommended it in a number of contexts recently. And I actually think, if anything, it's even more relevant to Mike's point. I was reflecting that 200 years of management thinking around hierarchy and control have just become obsolete. And actually the old mechanisms for listening, engaging and responding, surveys and so on, are just again, not fit for purpose in this context. So more than ever, you have to find ways of speaking truth to power. And doing that in a really thoughtful way and in a way that really connects purpose with performance. We hear a lot about that. You hear a lot about agility. And if you can't find ways of unlocking the friction points within an organization, then actually you can't move quickly. And so, I actually think this is one of the most powerful ways that you can do it. So, for example, we just recently put it in place with a famous large supermarket chain in the UK. Where they needed to rapidly realign their strategy and be able to change their culture to be able to deliver differently. They did that within 6 weeks.
Wow.
And they did that in a digital way as well, because it was in kind of period of lockdown, and it was in the midst of COVID crisis and what have you. And they probably made more progress through that than they have through, multiple other processes. So it doesn't have to be mechanistic. And if you set it up in the right way, then you've got ongoing conversations. You've got those sort of regular feedback loops that can continue. And I think the other kind of piece as well about this that I've think is also important to call out, and why it is relevant, is that it kind of helps you really sort of get under the skin of what are those repeated patterns that help and don't help. What are the norms and beliefs that are going on beneath the surface? So you actually direct and target the action at the right stuff and don't waste time. So again, in that supermarket example, for years they've been tackling work around how do we change our culture, how to become more performance orientated. Yep. Why is it we can't do these things? And fundamentally through this, we unlock the fact that the reason you can't do it is because relationships matter. And being popular matters far more than actually delivering results. And until they got to that level of insight, they couldn't kind of tackle it. And so, you can spend hours, months, years on projects they tackle, and they put in place new performance management processes and new incentives and restructured and change people. But actually that until they address that underlying belief and norm within the organization, they weren't going to unlock those things. So, I think sometimes if you don't sort of get to those root causes and you don't sort of find ways of sort of unlocking, then frankly, it's just going to take a lot longer in the long run, and you just keep repeating those same patterns again and again and again. Yeah.
I'm going to first turn to a question that's come up on the chat, and then Ed, I'm going to bring your voice back in here. So Annette, you had asked about how you select 100 people to interview, which is a large number of people, and those are actually really robust, qualitative. And there's a number of pieces of advice coming from leaders in the chat itself. But having facilitated a number of these approaches, a couple pieces of advice I'd share is one that first of all, is that the task force, those people that you've chosen as a leadership team to go out and do this process are the ones that are selecting the interviewees. And so you're selecting folks that are plugged into and have connections across the organization to serve on the task force. And so they're looking at a statement of direction or a change that the leadership team's trying to make happen, and thinking about together who those best 100 people to talk to in the organization are, representative of the kind of change that you're trying to make happen, and representative. We in setting up the structure will help to do some just quantitative structuring of what does your organization look like from a demographic perspective, from a division perspective, et cetera, to try to do some representative spreading of folks across. But that process is a mix of both what should it look like, and then the who, and the only people that get to choose and know the who are the task force themselves. Anything else I missed there on that, guys, that you would add?
No, I'm sorry. I neglected to mention that important point. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
great.
very important.
Ed, what's your take on today's world and how this plays?
Well, change is happening at a more rapid pace now than ever before. I could have said that 10 years ago too. So if we keep going, doubling every X decades, the more you change, the more you need to engage the change, the more you need to stay current with the change, and the more rapid you need to engage it. So anything that accelerates engagement and accelerates the process, I think which this process very much does, it is definitionally more important now than ever. And one other thought on it, we don't spend a huge amount, never spend a huge amount of time telling the task force who to talk to. We just said, go find 10 or 15 or 20 people each, talk to them. And what happens is that these factors in the organization, everybody knows about them. As Lynn said a couple of times, you're turning you're basically turning the iceberg upside down. It's another way of thinking about this. 90% of what goes on in an organization is below the surface. It happens at the water cooler. So it's there. And so you don't need to concern yourselves too much about who the task force, you just tell the task force, look, first you choose the task force, who's on it's the direct reports, and you want to choose people, that are probably high potential, high performance in the company, but people that you would trust to tell you bad news if they brought it back to you. People you trust in the organization, and then they go out and you don't have to overly prescribe them. Talk to, you say, look, spread it around. Don't talk to the 4 people sitting right next to you. But you'd be surprised. The feedback is not dependent upon that, because the facts are out there. The organization knows what's going on. You just try and understand what it is and hear it. So it's there. Everybody knows it. It's just that the top team needs to hear about it.
Yeah. Ed, I want to recall something you told me in an interview I conducted with you after you did the division SFP. And that was, you said, I was new and people didn't know me. And as soon as I did this, people said, it went around the organization, oh, they get it, meaning they're going to hear the real truth about what's going on. And that is instantaneous, and it changes that relationship, and that's key.
Well, the other example I gave, which was one of the more uncomfortable nights of my life, was after the task force, when I became CEO in 2000. The number one message back was about SAP was in big trouble. And this was a major project of mine. This I started as the CFO. It started as a Y2K project in 1998 and emerged and evolved into an SAP implementation, which in those days, and even now today, it's tough, but in those days, that was the year that Hershey basically shut itself down from being able to deliver candy at Halloween because their SAP implementation blew up. And this was all over the news. And so this is the first thing I hear within weeks of becoming CEO. I had a long night to chat with myself. I got up the next morning. I stood in front of the group. I said, I heard you. I own this. This is mine. And we're going to fix it.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, it wasn't pleasant, but I think that established me as a CEO that you could speak truth to power to. And I think it helped me in the next 10 years.
I am imagining that the folks at Salesforce and the folks at Disney right now would probably benefit from those kind of conversations and not having that.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to turn to Mike Lizzie, who has participated in the chat and shared that, Ed, he was part of a task force of yours and is now is still at Becton Dickinson. So Mike, anything you'd share from your experiences in your role today as a leader?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for the opportunity to join this call because to be honest, I didn't know we were going to talk about this. And when I saw Ed was one of the speakers, I thought it was an opportunity for me to just join in. But so Ed, I'm coming from Sparks, Maryland, where you started the magic as your path as a leader. But I was on the strategic fitness process back in the 2010, 2011. And I went through that. I was actually one of the people on the task force, and I traveled around the world, meeting with different associates from Beijing to Dubai to Singapore. And I brought back my observations from those direct interviews back to the fishbowl. And so, Mike, when you brought up the fishbowl exercise, I'll tell you what, as a task force participant, it's a little concerning because you're sitting in a round table and the senior leaders are around you and you're just putting it on full blast. But it was really important that at that time, Alberto Mas was our president. And he took what we said directly, and then I think it fed up into you, Ed, and into Vince. And so I think it's a great opportunity to leverage the process. And I'm in a new role within BD. I went from an R&D position to a medical affairs position, and now I'm working through an organizational restructure. And so this has invigorated my memory from the early 2010s, and something I plan on buying a book called Fit to Complete, because I need to start implementing it in my own process.
We're happy to share one with you, Mike. Yeah,
Just
go
to
ahead,
build
Ed.
on that, this process, we've been talking about this as it applies to businesses, divisions, or corporations. We can also, as you're thinking about it there, Mike, you can apply this to countries. You could do one if you have a country organization. You could apply it to a function.
We've done that. We've done that at a large pharmaceutical company without mentioning a name.
Yeah. So it's not limited to businesses. You could apply this process to any organizational entity, functions, countries, whatever.
Right, and not just for
and not for profits. My church right now could benefit from it.
So I'm gonna get ready to wrap us up in just a few minutes to give people those hopefully few moments to breathe between now and your next Zoom call. And I wanted to turn to Mike and Lynn and Ed and ask your advice, right, for the leaders on the call today. And I'd invite any final reflections from those of you out there. And as you think about what you can take away as it relates to these principles and in service of, the performance that you need to deliver, the agility that you have to have in today's world, what advice, Mike, would you have for leaders as they think about what they need to do in the path ahead?
Well, I think they should. I would first of all mention, I didn't mention this, that probably getting a facilitator, a consultant to help you with this process, not to do it, but to help you and your senior team do it is probably a worthwhile endeavor. So I would say find someone, maybe they're in your HR function, which is, I hope, as a strategic partner, can play that role if they've been trained properly. We did that at BD. We did that in a number of other organizations, including Merck and so on. That basically find somebody to talk to about what you're trying to do and why, and begin the process with your senior team. So that's where it's got to start. Are we ready to do this?
That's great.
I would build on that idea and say everyone on this call, everyone on this Zoom has direct connection into Kathy and her associates, and to Jeannie, who's the CEO of the Higher Ambition Alliance. And yes, if you may have someone in your organization, chances are you may or may not. But if you don't, call Kathy, call Jeannie, call me for that matter. I mean,
call me, whatever.
Call Mike. Call Mike.
These are folks who love to be helpful, all of us.
Yeah, you do need to get started. If you've never done this before and you want to get going, you do need a very basic facilitation. It's not difficult. And once you've done it with outside facilitation, you have somebody come in and help you out. This is consultant light. These are not, these are not McKinsey engagements.
Right.
When they introduced this at Becton Dickinson, as Mike just said, we developed our own in-house facilitators. And we'd bring back Mike and Russ Eisenstadt every once in a while for major events, but by and large, we ran the process ourselves. But call for help.
Yeah, but what are the headlines that you would share? And I'm going to go to you in a second, Lynn, but with your colleagues, right? So Mike, you made the good point that the first thing that you need to do is to convince a leadership team that, and I honestly remember I went to lunch with Mike and our colleague Russ Eisenstadt when I first came to know you now 15 years ago and said, where do you find CEOs willing to do this? This sounds hard, right? But it sounds tremendously valuable. What, Ed, would you say to a peer about why do this, just to leave folks with that headline?
Well, to cut to the chase, it works. It really, really does work. This is not, as I said, this has been demonstrated in many, 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 many dozens, if not hundreds of applications. It works. Number one, it works. It's very natural. I think that you can do this within the context of whatever your leadership style is. Hopefully it's engaging and someone who's open-minded about change, and you're a good leader. Let's assume you start with good roots. This is adaptive to whatever style you prefer within that nuance of personality. So this is not a cookie cutter. This is not a cookie cutter.
Yeah.
The structural elements of this to decide to do it, to put forward a statement of where we're going, to get a task force. Those are very basic things. Those are just basic fundamentals. What happens after that is highly personalized and highly focused on you as a leader, and you will be able to measure it. I guarantee you'll be able to measure it. The other thing I used to do as CEO, I shared it with my board. I said, this is where I'm going, this is what I'm doing, and I will keep you posted on our journey. And the board completely supported me. So if you're a CEO of a public company, do it, tell your board you're doing it, and I guarantee you they're going to say bravo.
Thank you. Lynn, many recent experiences. What would you leave leaders on the call today with?
Well, I think my best advice on this is, I hope this translates. So I think you need to skate to where the puck is. So start with where is the challenge within the organization, where is the energy, and that could be at an organization level, or it might actually just be that it has to start at a restaurant or a hotel or a hospital or a factory or whatever unit it is level, or a division and so on. So, go where there's some energy, go where there's something real, and there's some fundamental kind of friction points that are getting in the way. I think that's a great way of breaking into it, frankly. You don't have to make this big and complicated and, too tricky.
I should mention, by the way, that we have done this in multiple cultures, India, Japan, so forth. And as long as the language issue is dealt with effectively, it works.
It really does. It really does. And there's lots more to learn from. And so in conclusion, I will just share a couple of resources for folks as you think about, and well, before I even go there, I just want to say thank you so much to Mike, to Ed, and to Lynn. You're really bringing this to life as leaders and researchers and practitioners. Really appreciate the time that you've shared with the community today. So Gail, why don't you throw up the slide that just gives a couple suggestions for folks. So first and foremost, some of you have already reached out and we've sent to you, or if you've asked for it, you should soon be receiving a copy of Mike's book, Fit to Compete, that talks about these approaches. And we're happy to share a copy of that with you. Gail has entered some email addresses in the chat for how to go about that. Secondly, Mike and Russ have been partnering with an organization, CorpU and Udemy, that has developed a really robust training program that's available online, and that's leading transformative conversations. And you can get more information about that in the link in the chat. And lastly, we're, as everyone just said on the call, and myself and my colleague Jeannie, we are really love to chat with leaders about where you're at and what you need and how can we help, or how can we just, share some resources with you. So please do feel free to reach out and talk. So thank you all for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.